My name is Stacy McDonald, and I'm the Evaluation and Learning Specialist at the Ontario Trillium Foundation. And I am doing this webinar, Evaluating Your Pilot, Setting Yourself Up for Success, in response to some of the challenges that we've been seeing some of our grantees, organizations that we've been working with, organizations that have applied for funding, especially organizations that are doing work like testing a new program, doing a pilot, and that are having difficulty building evidence so that they're well positioned to receive a larger grant to grow their program. So that is kind of my reasoning, what inspired me to do this webinar. So hopefully that's helpful for everyone out there. So what are we going to cover today? I'll start off covering some things that you might want to keep in mind when planning the evaluation of your pilot. Then I'll cover the role of evidence in grant applications and how this relates to evaluation. And then I'll follow that up by discussing an overview of evaluation, what it is, why it's important, and how it can help advance your work. I'll also provide a few tips and things to consider as you're carrying out your pilot and your evaluation. So what should you keep in mind when planning for the future of your pilot? So unlike smaller grants, which are used to test out new ideas, larger grants are often used to help build on a model or program success. Because of this, organizations requesting larger grants often have greater requirements when it comes to supporting the case for their work. If, for example, an organization is looking to the future and considering what needs to be in place to make sure that it is well positioned to expand its work, it should be prepared to answer, how do you know it works? What difference does it make? So how do you answer these questions? You conduct an evaluation. So you ask questions, collect data, and analyze it. It's not about whether a program is or isn't successful in general. It's about demonstrating the program's capacity to achieve specific outcomes. So I like to share this work from Nesta. Nesta is a UK organization that developed standards of evidence, which are on a scale of 1 to 5. Level 1 represents a lower level of evidence, appropriate to very early stage innovations, like Ontario Trillium Foundation's seed grants, where we can only expect organizations to clearly describe what they do and why it matters. As the levels progress, it's expected the data is collected to show positive change, then perhaps causation, and finally the results are replicated and confirmed. So what does this mean for organizations engaging in a pilot program? At the beginning of your pilot, you know what you want to achieve. Now you need to figure out how you will know if a positive change occurred and what data you'll need to capture to determine this. Eventually, if you expand the program, you may want to explore if it's right for you, how you can understand to what extent your program is causing that positive change. So what do you need to know about evaluating pilots? Evaluation is the systematic gathering and interpretation of information about a program to help decision making. In a nutshell, evaluation is about asking questions and using what you have learned to move forward. So if you ever feel overwhelmed by the process of evaluation, bring it back to this idea. Evaluation is asking questions and developing a plan to answer those questions. Ultimately, answering those questions will provide you with the information you need to better carry out your program. You can ask all kinds of different questions, and evaluation really is an important tool to help you do your best work. Why do it? There's so many ways evaluation can bring value to your work beyond having the evidence you need to submit a good grant application. So I'd like to just take a minute to go over some of these. So you can learn about what's working and what isn't, from the format of your activities to the length or the setting. It depends on what you want to learn. Whatever your results are, they can help you improve your program. For example, if there's a program for women who've recently immigrated and language barriers were identified as something that needed to be addressed ahead of time. However, there still wasn't a lot of participation. Afterwards, staff members decided to interview, to have some conversations with a few community members to figure out why there wasn't a lot of uptake as part of the evaluation. And they realized that a lack of access to daycare was a big barrier that needed to be addressed if they wanted their program to succeed. So it's something that that maybe they can or cannot address, but it's something that unless you really have a plan to ask those questions, then it's difficult to determine what happened. Evaluation can also help you understand if you're getting the results you expect. That is, whether or not a positive change is happening in relation to the outcomes you've identified for your program. Once you have your results, you can use that information to build a strong case for expansion. So that's when I mentioned building the evidence of your work, of the effectiveness of your work. And you can use that to get more support, including getting more funds to grow your work. Finally, you can use what you learn to tell a better story for your community, for your stakeholders, any kind of communication, that if you have a more fulsome picture of the value that you're adding, then that just tells a much better story. And evaluation is a really great tool to get that better story of what the value of your work is. So I really like this little graphic. It shows all the different steps in an evaluation. Don't be overwhelmed if you're pretty new to evaluation. We won't go in depth on all these steps today. That's a whole other workshop or week workshop, really. But what I wanted to make a few points is that there are a lot of resources and guides out there that can help walk you through all these steps. So I got this image from one of those guides. You don't have to figure it out all on your own. Make use of these resources. Um, and OTF is trying to provide some of these resources as well. So one place that you can go to get some of these resources is the Knowledge Center that OTF has created. And part of the Knowledge Center includes a measurement hub where we discuss a lot of things related to measurement and evaluation. There's also an e-learning course, a free e-learning course that we've developed that have a lot of resources. So do check those out. At the end of the presentation, I'll share the links to that. The other couple things I wanted to point out here is that while there are a lot of steps here, to not wait till the end, that like this should be woven into your program from beginning to end, and that that approach is likely to be less overwhelming at one point, to be like, wow, I need to do all these things. And then finally, evaluation is more than doing a survey. You need to think upfront about what you want to learn, and then be sure that you collect the right information the right way to answer those questions, and make sure that you take time to review those findings and think about what some next steps could be and to communicate those findings. So before you start, I'm just going to go over a couple of the earlier steps in the evaluation that I think are really important to help set you up for success. So you should be really clear about the change you want to see. So that change in either individuals or your community are your program outcomes. And for many organizations, this means you might need to shift your focus on outcomes and not just activities. So why the program is needed, what you want to see changed in people in your community, and not the activities that you carry out. Be very clear about the outcomes you're working towards and check that one of the outcomes aligns with funder outcomes. And then this is also a really great time to make sure that you focus your evaluation on the things that matter most to you, not just a funder. So ask yourself, why are you evaluating? What do you need to learn about? This can help you determine the type of evaluation and methods you want to use. Is it about improving your program, about documenting your outcomes, both? So this is the time to make choices about what you want to learn. It can't be everything. So what do you need to know about evaluating pilots? So while you can definitely ask evaluation questions and collect data that help you improve your work, at the end of the pilot, you should know if this new approach is worth adopting. To understand this, you need to measure outcomes. At the end of your pilot, you need to decide whether it's worth moving your pilot forward as is, or if you need to make any adjustments and test again. And it's best to use evidence and inform that decision. So you need to ask yourself, is this more or less effective than what we've tried before, and or what is being offered in the community elsewhere? You might want to consider not only the degree of change, but also how many people were reached. Were the right people reached? Are some being excluded or dropping out? Also consider if the degree of change you're seeing is worth the cost of the program. Is there a more efficient option out there? Can you get similar results at a lower cost, which allows you to engage more people or engage participants in a deeper, more meaningful way? So how do you understand if a change occurred? There are a lot of different options when it comes to evaluating outcomes. I would suggest that you start by looking at external research, maybe even something that inspired or informed your program, your pilot. If similar evaluations of research have already been done, then you may not need to do such an in-depth evaluation, but instead you can rely on existing findings to help tell your story. Also, look at what other people measured, how they measured, what were their indicators of success. And then that can help you decide what you're going to do. So if that's the case, then you might want to also think about looking at your results compared to other results. Were there differences? Did you tweak some things? What was the result of those differences? So you might want to consider also collecting data before, during, and after your program so you can see if a change actually took place. Asking people to look back and talk about the past isn't really reliable. And there are also ways to have greater confidence in your results, and that is what's listed here as a mixed methods approach. So you try to collect data from more than one source in more than one way so that if you're hearing the same message from different sources or different ways of collecting the information, then you can have a lot more confidence in what is being said. Also consider seeing what data you already collect, or are there ways that you can tweak what you already collect to make better use for your evaluation. So sometimes people can use already have intake or exit forms, registration forms? Is there any way to get, baseline information through those mechanisms so that you don't have to devise a whole new way of getting information, but working with what you already have? Another option, which does require more resources but can give you a lot of great information, is to use a comparison group to understand if a change happened. And so that's studying what's happened not only with your program participants, but also with a similar group of people to try to understand if other things might have caused the change. And that brings me to my last point. So also considering what else is happening in your community, in the province, that might contribute to any changes. So are there new laws, regulations, new programs being offered, economic changes? Is there, really high unemployment? Are there things going on outside of your work that could have had that could explain why a change happened beyond simply the participation of your program? So just to explore how confident you are that it is your work that has led to the positive change in some way. I'm not saying that you need to say, oh, that's entirely me, but just to explore what else is happening. And this could also be really helpful if you feel like, wow, like my participants are saying that that this is a really great program, a really great resources, but we're not really seeing like huge changes, substantive changes. Maybe there are other things happening that are kind of working against that. So it's always a good idea to just consider the context as part of your evaluation. So pilots are typically pretty short, at least the pilots that OTF funds. So a year. And there is plenty you can learn in a year, but you'll likely only be able to report on preliminary results. So you can measure what's happening with people before and immediately after your pilot. It is not really enough time realistically to see if there are significant changes in people's lives. But that shouldn't stop you from collecting data throughout and not waiting until the end. And so start right away. And also think about what is the right level of outcome for you to measure for your pilot. So focus on measuring short-term outcomes. So those are typically changes in skills, awareness, attitude, and knowledge. So not necessarily seeing that longer-term behavior life change, but the first steps that would indicate that you're on the path to success. So at the end of your evaluation, you'll need to decide what's next. Is this an idea that's ready to be fully implemented? Or do you need to continue experimenting or testing? And that's totally fine if that's the case. So you may realize, you're not quite ready. It's not quite there. So go ahead and make some changes and test again. Regardless of the outcome, even if the results are pretty preliminary, I'd like to encourage everyone to share what you've learned, perhaps on OTF's Knowledge Center. Just sneaking in another little plug there. Chances are there is another organization or community facing similar challenges. So if you felt like, oh wow, we didn't expect that, this is something interesting we're learning, do share it, please. All right, so finally, I'm just going to go over 3 common pitfalls that we see at OTF with organizations that are applying for funds. So very briefly, the first is outcome alignment between your program's outcomes and a funder's outcomes that they've identified as part of their strategy. So not every outcome related to your work and mission that you want to measure will align well with the funder's outcome. That's okay. Go ahead and include them in your evaluation. But be sure that you are, if you're thinking ahead, I want funds to grow this, that you do measure something that is aligned with a potential funder. And that just keep that in mind if you're like, oh, we want this program to affect multiple changes. That is something that if you're trying to decide between like, okay, we can only measure 2 things or 3 things, what should we measure, just keep that in mind. So let's talk through an example. If the programmatic outcomes are customer service and computer skills are developed, participants feel prepared to engage in the job search, and the funder outcomes are people have the skills and knowledge to achieve greater financial independence, and that's a great fit. If you also have an outcome that's something about participants making connections in the community, then go ahead and measure that. But in terms of if you're only seeing a change on that front and not this other outcome by the funder, then maybe look for a funder that is a better match for the other outcome. Next is there's often confusion around what type of data, what type of information can demonstrate a positive change. So there are all kinds of facts and information that can be useful to your work, but don't speak to whether a program is effective in achieving a specific outcome. I'm not saying that you shouldn't collect the data. It could be very useful to you, but I just want to highlight and identify the kinds of data you can collect that can shed light on whether a positive change is occurring, and that can help build the evidence of your effectiveness of your program. So the example is a parenting program aims to help new parents support their children's emotional development. In this example, how do we know the program has been effective in helping parents support their children's emotional development? So what would work is asking the parents the same set of questions and deriving a collective answer about whether it's working or not. So that can be done multiple ways. It could be focus groups, interviews, surveys, and then the data is later analyzed for patterns and themes. We can also use, staff could use a checklist and track interactions and behaviors between parents and children and see if there's any changes that develop over the course of the program. Now over to the middle bucket, while it's still good information, accounts of customer satisfaction or measuring the level of demand are maybe good for your knowledge, but isn't related to whether a program model achieves a specific positive change on a specific outcome. And then finally, data showing that there's a need, such as the number of children at risk, is important and very important, and is often also a question asked in a grant application, but does not demonstrate change. So if there's a section in an application that is asking about evidence, about demonstrating change, that is not the place to include that. Sorry about that. I'm just getting over a bit of a cold. Finally, another common pitfall we see is organizations wait till the end of the pilot to start thinking about evaluation. Evaluation doesn't just happen at the end. It's hard to get good insights if you don't have the right plan in place to collect the data you need. So don't wait too long. Start now if you're at the beginning of a pilot. So just a couple other tidbits before we move on to questions. Did you know that you can apply for up to 10% of your OTF grant application budget towards your own evaluation? Also, this is our little promotion for our Knowledge Center, and there's the website. These are the other two resources. The YouTube channel where we have webinars recorded, such as conceptualizing evaluation that covers how to help you plan for an evaluation, as well as the address there for the e-learning course. And if you still have questions, you can always call OTF's support center or email me directly. So thank you very much and have a great afternoon.